Resilience is the ability to collect resources to get you to the next stage. It's not the tough skin. It's not being able to bounce back quickly. It's about when there's a what now moment, when there is a point or a pivot, how do you reach your network, reach into your tool bag and find the right tools to get you towards a little bit more clarity.
Welcome to That Pivotal Moment of Change, the podcast where we dive into the career-defining moments that shape who we become. Success, setbacks, big decisions, we unpack it all. Let's get into it. On today's episode, we're speaking with Tim Gilligan.
Hey, Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Ryan.
Super excited to have you here today and have this discussion with you. Let's kick this off here, talk a little bit about you. Can you talk about your background and how you got into operations work?
Sure. So I moved to New York to pursue theater, and, had some sojourns into large-scale immersive theater. There was this show in New York called Sleep No More that I worked on and found myself falling into the role of the enabler, the supporter, the getting stuff doneer in that space, and really fell in love with the power of collective storytelling and world building. From that kind of operational foundation in theater, I was like, what does scale look like? And for me, that was pivoting into software delivery management for a global company. Then I was like, oh, cool. I really like creatives. Let's think about recruiting and building teams. So I spent some time as a recruiter, and then finally transitioned into design operations formally, which for me is like a real consolidation of all of the work I've been doing to date. So that's sort of like my red thread career in a nutshell.
Very cool. So let's talk about, what were you doing in theater?
Yeah. So all of the things, but I think I sort of was wearing like the producer hat, which was filling in all of the scenes. I worked as a production manager, so really ensuring that the work of all of the designers and directors, et cetera, like was realized, right? So like running lumber from, the lumber yard and then cutting it down and then transforming a vision into a tactical thing. And then also spending a lot of time really caretaking for the narrative arc and figuring out how to move audiences through space. I have a background also in hospitality. So like the movement of people through experiences perhaps is another through line we could use in digital space and physical space. How do you get from point A to point B in a really enjoyable way is something I've spent a lot of time thinking about.
I love that. And how did the transition from theater into recruiting go?
Yeah, so I was actually hired to create a service design practice. And if you're familiar with the language of service design, they talk a lot about front stage, backstage. I was like, oh, I know that, right? Like I know what happens backstage and on the stage. And so I had spent a little bit of time in software delivery management, so understood UX in like the more product digital space, had the immersive theater experience. So for me, it was just stitching that together. And it was really cool. It was like talking to landscape architects and being like, hey, I think you're actually a service designer, right? Finding folks who are really at the intersections of skill and interest, and then translating that into something that the market really wanted to hire. So that was a fun journey.
Okay, so I do want to talk to you about the day-to-day of an operations leader. But before that, going into theater and eventually recruiting, did you ever in your mind think I would someday end up in operations?
No, it wasn't on my radar as a career path, but I'm so happy I'm here.
It's always fascinating to me. And everyone I talk to starts off going one way and ultimately end up going a completely different, and love what they do and happy they're doing it, but it's not the end point that they thought it would be starting out.
For sure. Yeah. Lots of inflection points have led me to where I am today, for sure.
Cool. Hopefully we'll get into some of that today. In the meantime, can you talk about the day-to-day in operations?
Yeah, so I think in a chief of staff and design operations role, I'm really not only serving as an operator for a design organization and a research organization, but also thinking about how we design the systems and practices um, to get it all done. So for me, it's really creative problem solving, right? Like any design task. It's about coalition building, shared incentives, and really figuring out the right ways um, to move groups of folks towards a shared purpose and drive momentum. So what that looks like day to day can really be varied, obviously very meeting heavy, we're a consensus driven environment. Um, but it's really about building a framework and then bringing others along through that framework and being flexible to shift the approach to match the ever evolving needs of the business.
And if there was one thing that you could say to somebody looking to get into operations, one piece of advice, what would it be?
Be flexible, right? Like, I think strong opinions loosely held. I think as operators, sometimes I got feedback early in my career. Hey, Tim, the gray space seems to really freak you out. You should work on that. And so I think bringing an operational mindset to ambiguous space and finding the right foundations that will make you feel confident in bringing your skill set to the forefront is the advice I would give.
What are some key lessons you've learned throughout your career?
It's really a reminder that people are core to everything and progress, right? The best ideas fail when we don't pay attention, care for, and nurture the humans that we rely on to get it done. Um, in reflecting on my career, those kind of pinnacle moments and those moments that I'm the most proud of are when the plan doesn't go exactly as you expected it to. You get, something from left field and you have to be resilient. And if you have a group of people that you can trust, that you've cultivated that um, sense of belonging and connection with, really magical, innovative, new things can come out of those moments of kind of chaos or unexpected circumstances.
So one thing that you've hit on there a few times is coalition, and I think community and bringing people together. Have you had situations where there wasn't really a community, or you actually had to go out and build that, or you had to help pull this coalition together?
Yeah, I mean, I think in many moments, right? As a recruiter, you're often working your own desk. In design operations, often we work as teams of one or some. And so early in my career, coming from theater, right, which is all ensemble, everything is built together. I was sort of like, oh, I'm the only one who's accountable for this. Um, and so, I'm never one to just accept the boundaries that your role title might provide you. And so, you find those early adopters, you find those advocates in the corners of the org. You don't have to be, officially assigned to a project to be collaborators and co-conspirators. And I think that for me, coalitions, right? It's all about folks who have very different incentives and then finding the red thread that stitches them all together.
And what are some of the bigger challenges you faced in your career?
For me, closing chapters has always been hard. I grew up in theater and in hospitality where you have natural, inconvenient endings, right? A show closes, an event you've produced, and then it's over and you move on to the next thing. And moving into corporate, right, those cycles are less clear. And so that was an adjustment. Of course, you have annual plans, you have quarterly goals, but they can bleed from cycle to cycle. And so that was definitely an adjustment. And then I also thought, especially in my 20s, that careers were a race, right? Everyone uses the ladder, kind of metaphor. And so I spent a lot of my time over indexing on figuring out the system, which I think can be alienating. And really lucky to have like had that systems mindset. But I think, especially earlier in my career, I may have lost sight of the people and the community. And so I found myself returning to community a lot more as I've navigated my career.
I like how you kind of frame that there with closing chapters.
Yeah.
Those are some good challenges there. Can you talk a little bit about how you overcame challenges?
Yeah. Asking for help has been huge. We don't have to suffer alone. And in fact, I find I love when people ask me for help. So I noticed that. And then I just started asking my community colleagues, folks who are doing the similar role at other companies, hey, how are you solving this? I'm a leader in the New York chapter of the Design Ops Assembly. And the Design Ops Assembly is this organization that connects design operators across the world. And just having that non-judgmental space to ask a question, hey, are you facing this similar challenge, has been really powerful. I think the thing that has also been really valuable is goal setting and ensuring that I create, like smart goals, right? You want to create time bounded moments to reassess and reflect, evaluate and reevaluate. If the system is not giving you those moments, I have found it really powerful to just put those reflection, look back moments into my own cycle and approach.
One thing you mentioned earlier there is networking, which is incredibly important, I think, for anyone at any stage of their career. What is it that got you into getting involved?
So for me, I think I'm inherently curious. Again, I mentioned like really wanting to understand the system, and I took a lot of risks in my career entering into digital product development, entering into recruiting for service design, entering into this nascent field of design operations. And I knew enough to get the gig, I guess, and was persuasive enough that someone took the chance on me, and many someones. But I also felt like it was a duty, right? Like I want to do well. I was like slow to read growing up. And so the idea of like hard work and intentional focus wasn't new to me. And so when I was in those roles and had the opportunity to practice a new skill, I was hungry. I started volunteering at the Service Design Global Jam and became a co-organizer in New York, and like just found the communities that were operating at peak performance and that were respected by industry, respected by people I knew. And I just situated myself next to those experts so that I could learn through osmosis, through conversation, and through networking.
I love that you've done that. I think it's just incredibly important.
It's the best way to have that kind of full cycle. You learn a thing, teach a thing, have that thing taught back to you, and you learn something else.
Yes, 100%. Can you share an instance where a setback or failure turned into a hidden opportunity?
There's countless ones. But I think the one that I'll share now is I was working on this big program with a bunch of collaborators. It was going to be this experience that was going to be a live music show with all of these digital components. And we realized we didn't have the expertise in our ensemble of designers and creators to know how to build a mobile app. We wanted, this was, 15, 20 years ago now, we wanted all of the people in a concert to have the lights controlled by their heartbeat. And so it was like iPhones had just come out, pretty rudimentary, like through the camera flash, you could get the heartbeat from the finger, but we didn't know really how to like translate that. And so that curious question and frustration of like, we're not going to be able to realize the central design element of this show launched me on my path into digital product development. I was like, oh, I can figure out how to design and develop an app. I never thought that that would be the spark of an idea that has led to the past, 10 plus years of digital product development, operations, enabling creatives in tech. Um, but it's been a really powerful ride, and I'm happy. I'm happy that we had that setback because otherwise I wouldn't have looked in this direction.
This next question might ebb in with the previous question, but can you recall a moment in your career that significantly influenced your path?
So I think when I was recruiting service design, it was this moment where I realized it was a craft that was emerging. It was a craft that, of course, people had been using this mindset, had been looking. Service design has, long roots, but it was coming into the popular kind of corporate cycle. And so I felt really emboldened to both empower creatives with this new language of like, hey, market yourself as a service designer, and all of these doors may open up. You have to have done the work and have the mindset and be able to do the do. But that really unlocked and unleashed for me this idea of limitless possibility, and that the role that you may be in 5 years may not have a name yet. And I think this has become kind of like the rule of the game for design and for all, like with the emergence of AI, everyone's like, what will the jobs be in 5 years? And for me, early in my career, I had this moment of really looking and saying, it's a blank tapestry. Focus on your skills, focus on what you bring to the table, and then the title will come. And lead with your capabilities, lead with your passion, and then we'll figure out the way to fit it in. And I think that for me, moving into design operations, moving into chief of staff roles, I've always been, I think, a bag of skills in search of the problem to solve versus the person chasing a title or a particular craft.
I think there was some great advice there, and I think it's also just an amazing mindset to have. What specific skills or mindsets have been crucial in navigating twists and turns in your own career?
Yeah, so we've been talking about community and network a lot. I think that's perhaps the most important, having folks to connect with, saying it out loud in non-judgmental space is really important. I've spent a lot of time also thinking about the power of storytelling, the power of persuasion, the power of crafting a vision and then bringing others along, and resilience. And so I think resilience is a hot word, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it with folks that I trust really deeply. And for me, resilience is the ability to collect resources to get you to the next stage. It's not the tough skin. It's not being able to bounce back quickly. It's about when there's a what now moment, when there is a point or a pivot, how do you reach your network, reach into your tool bag and find the right tools to get you towards a little bit more clarity. And for me, that's what I continue to return to. I have a friend who's written a book, and I've been working with her for 10 years. And so there's this tool called the resilience wheel that really helps you think in the moments of big change and also small change, how to navigate those sticky middles.
Do you mind if we dig into that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to hear more.
Sure. So it's this woman, Joan Ball, and she has a book called Stop, Ask, Explore. But in one of the chapters, and absolutely read it, high recommend, it's on my bookshelf. There's this conversation of resilience, which is similar to what I just shared, and then an exercise, which asks you in all of the vectors that are important to you, family, social, finance, faith, etc. Like in these moments of crisis, how do you navigate? And the invitation is to do it for like a small thing, like forgetting your keys or your wallet at home, and a big thing, like losing a job, getting a promotion, etc. And it's a real it's an imagination exercise of how might you react and how resilient do you think you can be? How quickly do you think you can resource yourself for that change? Um, and then it's a real self-reflection exercise to then allow you to prioritize, oh, am I happy with that? Is this the right wheel for me, or do I want to work on enhancing my ability? Do I need to, reassess my personal board of directors and build a new friend who can help give me advice? Or do I feel confident that I have the right people in my corner when change hits?
I really like that. Wrote it down. I'll make sure to give that book a mention.
Please, yeah.
Yeah, that's great stuff. With hindsight, what would you do differently in your career?
So I've thought about this a lot, both in preparation for this conversation and also in, my 15 plus year mark in career. Um, in my 20s, I thought career was a discrete thing and that I had to be 100% in whatever the discipline, the craft, the job I was in at that time. And it took me a while to connect the dots that my time in theatrical producing and storytelling experience was the unique value. That's why I was the one who was sticking out in the pile of resumes. That's why I was the, great choice in a tough talent market. And for me, I try to live a much more integrated life. And I think having that approach earlier would have helped me not to feel like I was role playing in each of my careers. So yeah, I think I would have integrated earlier, shared more, and started stitching my tapestry versus creating all of the patches.
I like that. And you mentioned something there, and it's come up a few times, storytelling. I have really started to try and understand and get into storytelling over the past few years, both from the perspective of talking about design, personal. Kind of curious your take on storytelling and how you would advise somebody to think about storytelling or learn more about it.
Yeah, it's really a great question. I think storytelling has two items, just like any content, right? There's the delivery, so there's like the how we tell, and then there's the content of what we tell. And I think in my perspective and in my training, because I trained as an actor, there are actually two very discrete ways to go about it. There's how to communicate to drive results, and that is like how you sit. That is tone of voice. That is posture. That's intonation. That's space making, right? When you're presenting, wait 7 seconds. Someone will fill the air, right? Humans hate the sound of silence, right? So introduce silence and you will drive trust and reliability, because then people feel like they want to engage. So I think there's a lot of really good work and resources on that. I mean, my training is much more theatrical. So I return to breath. I return to mise en place and scene, like how you're framed in the camera, how you're framed in the room. How do you create those physical proportions and dimensions? So that's maybe the tactical. On the content side, there's, a million ways to weave a story. For me, I always return to narrative arc, right? Like it's what you learn in like third grade, right? You have your exposition, your rising action, you have your inciting incident, and then you're kind of sloped on the roller coaster down and to resolution, right? And so I think, there's smart brevity out there. There's a bunch of different methodologies, but it's like give the context up front of the story, set the scene, paint the picture, then quickly rise to the point And then once you've really nailed that point, get out of it and to resolution, whether that be a question, whether that be an action you need folks to take as quickly as you can. And you don't want to skip anything. You want people to be lost in the forest, like looking for, the hidden gem. So make sure, you really like give those breadcrumbs. But I think brevity, and I probably should be, practicing what I preach. Brevity is a really powerful storytelling tool, and structuring that narrative arc to really maximize the goal of each of those stages, I think is really powerful.
It's become interesting to me for a lot of different reasons, but one of which, like the framework sounds so simple for how to tell a story, but then when you put it into practice,
Yeah,
it's challenging. It's not as easy as it sounds just to stitch something together and think about rising action. I think the more somebody actually practices those skills and just studies the art of telling a story, it helps you in so many ways, both professionally and personally.
agreed. And I think we sometimes over index on credentializing, right? Like, I've done all of this work. Here's all of my math. I can show it to you. And that's why you should trust me. What if you just walked in and saying, like, you're in the seat, you've been asked to do the thing, so they already trust you. Just come and accomplish what you were asked to accomplish. Certainly, there are times where you have to, have some evidence and the credential, but I always coach teams like, let's put that in the footnote. Like, yes, absolutely show the work, but don't talk about showing the work. Have the work if someone's interested in learning more,
Yeah,
but really be brief, concise, and focused with what you're there to accomplish.
I love it. I think it's just such a fascinating thing and just something that's a lot of fun to explore and think about and try to get better at over time.
Absolutely.
Looking forward, what are you most excited about?
So I got a new boss at the kind of midpoint of last year, like September, October time. And she's accountable for centralizing our research practice. And her name is Jen Cardello, Boston based. And I'm really pumped. I've spent a lot of my time learning about service design, UX and product design, design operations, of course, and really doing a deep dive this year on research and how to enable research insights to be super actionable, super juicy, and delicious for product partners in the business and really drive outcome is something I'm just like so excited to take on this year.
Yeah, that sounds exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question here, and I'm really interested in your take on this, sitting in the role that you sit in. I usually ask people, what do you think the future of design looks like? I'd be really curious to hear what you have to say about that, but I would also like to hear your perspective on the future of ops, because I know as things change in design and research, I'm sure that changes how you think about operations also.
So the future of design, I would say, is more integrated, right? If we look at maturity models, it's, the deep partnership versus the service model. And of course, we've been on that trajectory for years. Everyone's at a different point in practice. But I do think that there's a real opportunity to ensure that we're not sacred about anything like capital D designy, right? Like, all things are designed in our worlds. And so stitching the practice and the craft of design into the practice and the craft of commerce and industry, I think will continue to be important. We're no longer the experts at the head of the table or at, telling the compelling story. We're in the scrum, we're in the mess and the tumble with every other business leader. And so I think that's really, really important. Similarly for operations, right? Like, I think design operations and operations writ large has done a better job at teaching others that are perhaps visionary or more craft focused to account for operational realities. And so for me, I see operations continuing to be a strategic function. I see there being an opportunity to widen the aperture. And a conversation a lot of design ops leaders have been having is, again, it's really about the design of operation. I had the opportunity to collaborate on designing a business model, which, historically might have been a strategy function or a finance function, but operations and design operations in particular has this unique vantage point of balancing both the needs of the business and the opportunity space that a design perspective can bring to the table. So I see more of that. I see more framework development. I see more collaborative partnership across all of the, X ops, right? Product ops, finance ops, dev ops, growth ops. Like there's a million types of operators, and we're doing more of the same than we are separate. So finding the right ways to collaborate, I think, is going to be really important.
Cool. And I'm going to move on here to mentorship and advice. Who have been your most significant mentors or influencers, and what key lessons did you learn from those people?
So I'll get personal. So a good family friend and design ops leader in the world at Google right now is Michelle Morrison, who really helped me understand that this was even a career path. And in these moments of change has been really powerful. For me, Rachel Postman, former ballerina, now design ops kicking butt, just published a book with John Calhoun. And she taught me humility and care. Early in my career, I needed, a nudge to be more empathetic, and she was so gracious. And then finally, Ellie Cruz. So for both when I was a recruiter and then subsequently at Capital One, I've had the opportunity to work with Ellie as a client. And then finally, Ellie Cruz. So I had the opportunity to work with Ellie both when she was at Fjord and then subsequently at Capital One. She was a client when I was a recruiter and then became my leader. And she unlocked so many perspectives for me on the power of loyalty, hard work, and dignity. We've, done some really challenging things together, and always with dignity and care. And, you can choose the easy path or you can choose the careful path. And she's helped remind me that with care, we can really drive outcomes, but also feel really good about it.
Nice. And one question I sometimes like to ask around the theme of mentorship is, did you realize in the moment that these were mentors, or was it somewhat after the fact and looking back and realize, wow, like I learned a lot from that person, or that person was actually a great mentor and I didn't even think about it so much at the time?
So for me, everyone is a mentor. Everyone has something to learn. Like going back to like that ferocious desire to learn, I think, and my belief of mentorship is folks sharing of themselves. So I've been lucky to have these folks share of themselves. Certainly, like the size of the influence, I think we see in retrospect. For those three, though, like the moment I met them, I knew they were going to change my life.
What are the most important takeaways from your career journey that you would want to share?
Yeah, no, I mean, no path is paved. Often folks are like, hey, how did you move from theater into tech, etc.? And I was like, oh, am I unique? And then I like spent a lot of time looking, and I work with a lot of former musicians, a lot of, former performers or folks who are still performing, a lot of athletes, right? Like our careers, our journeys, they're not necessarily linear. Um, just like Candyland, right? Like the non-linear path is often sometimes a little sweeter. And so I think for me, again, I was like, there's a ladder and there's a way up that ladder and a way down. And that's not true, right? Like it's a real tapestry, and like we have agency And of course, we have agency, but it took me a minute to remind myself that like I am making a choice every day to do the work that I'm doing. And so I better love it because if not, why am I continuing to make this choice? So yeah.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I think from talking to a lot of people now doing this podcast, one thing that comes across with everyone is I don't think I've talked to one person yet who ended up where they started out. I think everyone started out thinking they were going to go one direction. Something happened. Sometimes it might have even been something happened, which at the time was, oh no, this is bad. But it ultimately ended up leading somewhere which worked out really well.
100%. Yeah. It just kind of got to go with the flow. Like absolutely just like I use a million metaphors, but like you kind of steer the boat and then you see where the tides take you. And then you figure out what your next move is going to be.
Yeah, totally. What advice would you give to someone earlier in their career who are still trying to figure things out?
I think I would say inventory the things that matter to you, that you're passionate about, and that you have an opinion about, and lead with that. I think at the end of the day, career, hiring, etc., is all about fit, right? It's about mutual fit. The candidate has to have the whatever that you need to get it done. The company has to have the values, the expectations, and the role that matches what you want to get done. And I find when someone really knows what they're really great at, like when I was coming into a design ops role, I knew I was really great at convincing talent to join companies to drive outcomes. And so the beginning of my design ops career was scaling a team from 13 to 26 in 6 months. And beyond that, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew what I could do. And I said, hey, this is the thing I can do. Is that of interest to you? And that's, I think, how matches are made. And it took me a couple revs to figure out I didn't have to like contort myself to the brief of the job. I just had to be secure in what I could offer. And then the right opportunities would find me.
That's a great answer. And what advice would you give to someone further along in their career who is more experienced practitioner or leader?
Continue to be humble. The world is changing. A boss of mine early in my career said she had a mandate to hire people who were smarter than her. And I took that to heart. The amount we learn from those who we lead will always be more than what we can offer them. And so I think taking the risks on the people that you will hire and that you will cultivate and help shape is an important role. And as we're advancing in our careers, also take stock of where you are. And it's the same thing, right? Like, I think often we're like, well, this is what I do. But it's like, what do you care about? And I think when leaders have what they care about on the tip of their tongue, it also unlocks a lot of opportunity.
100%. Well said. I like that. So we're going to move into some closing questions here. What is your favorite quote?
So it's a long one, so I'm just going to give a little bit and then recommend folks find it. But Martha Graham wrote a letter to Agnes DeMille, two choreographers. So I'll just read like the first part of what is a longer letter. There is a vitality, a life force, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there is only one of you in all time, this expression is unique. So the TLDR, each human, right, has something that's so interesting and intrinsically theirs. So it's not ours to judge how our value to the world. It's just our job to act, to be, to do. And I got that my freshman year of college from a teacher, and I've continued to return to it for the past 20 plus years.
That's awesome. I like that a lot. Lots of content out there. What are you looking at now and what would you recommend to others?
Sure. So 2025 feels like the year of scaling. Like there's a lot of conversation about how do we achieve scale. And so there's two books that I kind of am treating as my textbooks. And it's The Design Conductors by Rachel Postman and John Calhoun. It's like a handbook for design operations. Fantastic. They cultivated perspectives from design operators across the country and the world. Super good. And then Research That Scales, which is a research operations handbook by Kate Towsey. They're great companion pieces, both by Rosenfeld, and have been giving me a lot to chew on and think about as I approach this research project for the next year.
Cool. Thanks for those recommendations. And lastly, where can people find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, Tim Gilligan, work at Capital One. I'm also the New York chapter co-lead for the Design Ops Assembly. So you can find me on Design Ops Assembly. And then I'm bouncing around New York. So I'm here.
Awesome. Well, Tim, I really appreciate your time today. I think this was great. I think there was just some amazing takeaways and insights from you. And I am really excited to get this episode out there.
Thanks, Ryan. Me too. Appreciate the opportunity.
That's it for today's episode. Let's keep the conversation going. Drop a comment with your thoughts, like this episode if it resonated with you, and share it with someone who might benefit. And don't forget to follow so you never miss an episode. Thanks for being part of this journey with us. Until next time.